Good afternoon and welcome to the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee meeting. In attendance today we have, of course, myself, Chair and member of the 4th District. Councilman Burnett and Councilman Glover are absent at the moment. They may come a little later. Councilman Cohen and Costello are running a little bit late. Have Councilwoman Porter here and Councilwoman Ramos. Representing the Office of the President, I've got Preston here in the back. And representing the Mayor's Office, I've got Sophia.
Hey, Mr. Chair, this is Councilman Cohen. I'm online.
Oh, thank you, Councilman. So I've got Councilman Cohen joining us virtually, and as I understand, you'll be in a moment. Thank you, Councilman. This afternoon, the committee will have a hearing on legislative oversight, LO 22-0030, legislative oversight, crime reduction, and violence prevention, for the purpose of the committee holding regular hearings with the Police Department, Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, and other agencies to monitor the progress of the city's crime reduction and violence prevention efforts. This bill was sponsored by myself a long time ago. And I want to take a moment before we begin to recognize Acting Commissioner Rich Worley, who is joining us for the first time in his new role. Commissioner, I'm really looking forward to continuing to work with you in this new capacity and looking forward to hearing more about your vision for the department. Today, in particular, we're going to be hearing from the department on their summer deployment strategy. And this hearing is on the heels for me, and certainly I think also for the city, for an important and mass shooting that happened in my district last Friday evening. Incidents like this are precisely why we need to better understand the police department's strategy as weather continues to warm, schools are out. We know that historically these things lead to more violence in the summer. So I want to be mindful of our approach this summer. I want to work with the department to find out what their plan is and what they need in order to execute that plan effectively and keep our streets safe. So with that, I will turn it over to the department, to Commissioner Worley.
Thank you, Chairman Conway, and the committee's members of the committee. I want to introduce the team that's here with me today. As you said, I'm Acting Commissioner Rich Worley. I still have to get used to saying that. I'm here with Colonel Jones, Lieutenant Colonels Howe, Herzog, and Jason Callahan, as well as Director of Data Driven is Graham Campbell, Director Amethyst Spivak in the Deputy Commissioner's Office, Director of Government Affairs, Aaron Murphy, here in the front, and our Director of PIO, Lindsay Eldridge, and Deputy Director, Amanda Krotke, and then Captain Etwaro even gets introduced. He's in the Deputy's office today. So I'm ecstatic to be in the new position. I think we're going to continue to build on the momentum that we have, and Commissioner Harrison did a fabulous job preparing all of us to take over in his role. And I was lucky enough to be the one chosen, and I want to keep the train moving on the tracks that we're doing. And I'll just go, my opening statements will be really brief, and then I'll turn it over to the rest of the team to answer your questions about the summer crime plan. I'll give you some updates that we put in place yesterday to help with the issues that we're having throughout the city. So just to give you an update on before I get into the clearance rates, I'm going to give you what our date today is, because I know we do this all the time. The numbers are going to be from the 17th, but today, we are about 39 homicides down from where we were last year. Exceptional work from the men and women out there that go out there and do it every day, even though we're over 500 officers short. So I'll go into the clearance rates. You can see with the slides, our homicide clearance rates are up slightly. They're at 45.7%. National average is 55. And I gave the homicide detectives a challenge a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago when I spoke, that I think they're going to, and I know they're going to get up over 50% before the year is over. We've got a great team. Shootings are up. Clearance rate is up to 29.4%, which is a slight increase and above the national average. Our robberies are down slightly below the national average, but I think we'll we'll recover from that. And then our burglaries are above the national average and above where we were last year, which that's probably one of the toughest crimes to solve because there's very little evidence and very few witnesses. Then we move into the rape, which is 23% over 22%, which is up slightly, but still below the national average. But we hold our detectives to a very, very firm standard of operation, basically because we've made some errors in the past that we don't want to repeat. So we've put positions, put policies in place to make sure that that doesn't happen as we move forward. And then moving along, I just want to highlight some of the arrests. Narcotics arrests, 694, handgun violations, 670, robbery, 205, attempted murder, 92, and murder, 51. The significance is the narcotics arrest because we're starting to arrest more individuals for narcotics. It's up tremendously for the misdemeanor and up slightly for the felonies. And then we go into gun-related arrests. You can see our total arrests for guns are 701, up 1%. The majority of that down 1%. The majority of that comes from our patrol arrests. And when we say patrol arrests, that's not just the officers who are answering calls. That's everyone that's in the patrol division, which includes our mobile metro team, our west side, east side initiatives, and everyone that works under the patrol bureau. And then we have our non-patrol gun arrests, which those that are down significantly, but the amount of people that we have in non-patrol capacity that are actually out there doing enforcement is drastically reduced over the last several years. Then we'll go into the citywide overview. I'm not going to read all of those. You can see we've got some work to do a little bit with the commercial robberies, but everything else we're trending in the right way. The property crime is up, and that's mainly based on the stolen autos. We've talked about that ad nauseum about the Kias and Hyundais being stolen. So we're getting ready to put something in place through our PIO where we're going to start make sure we give out all the clubs. So they're working on something to make it where we can have a central or a couple central spots at different times where people can come and pick up the clubs for their vehicles. They just have to prove that they're city residents and they're the owner of the vehicle. Because we got to do a better job of getting those out, and we will. We're looking at ways to do that very soon. Now we move on to the district homicide comparison. Obviously, a couple districts have struggled. The Northeast, Maine one, has struggled. They're at 23 homicides this year compared to 18 at this time last year. The good thing is they've slowed down a little bit, thankfully. We've made some recent adjustments to some of our command. We moved a couple captains around. We did it for career growth and development. And I think that we've done a really good job with that, with where we've moved the Northeast has a new captain. The captain there moved to the Western. He's going to fall under a very good commander in the Western. He was under a good commander in the Northeast, but those were two really, really young commanders working together. And it wasn't fair that we put them both together at the same time and gave them the toughest district in the city. But once redistricting happened, Northeast will be very happy because they're losing some areas that are problematic. But we made some changes to help all of our commanders to continue to develop and continue to grow, and I think you'll see some changes in some of the districts. And we did that in order to get them in place before we do redistricting, because it's going to be a big change when we change the district's boundaries on July the 9th. So, and we'll get more into the homicides as well as the non-fatals. You see the Northeast, again, with the non-fatals. They've had some multiple victims, but it's something that we've been battling with the Northeast and Southeast. Southeast has seemed to settle down a little bit more, and we're hoping the Northeast will follow. It's just a really tough district. I was there for 3.5 years, and it's a lot of area to cover and they're extremely short on personnel, as is everyone. But they've done a good job, and I think we will succeed and see those numbers start to come down in both of those districts. Then we go into domestic and youth violence. This is probably the area that we've been hit really the hardest in this year because we've lost a lot of young people. You see that our homicides are 11 compared to 11 last year. The good thing is I think a lot of the things that we've done through the BPD and through the mayor's office, the curfews and the squeegee collaborative, all those things I think, and also helping to keep providing other resources and other things for the young people to do. I think that's what's helped us a great deal in trying to drive down some of these violent crimes with youth, because about 2 months ago, we were like 50% above where we were last year. And we're not that far above, even though losing one is too many. But I think we're gonna all the programs that we're running through the BPD and the mayor's office, you'll see that start to come down and continue to come down as we move through summer, which is challenging because everyone's out of school. So I think we've got a good plan in place that we'll talk about. And then you move into the juvenile arrests. You can see we're at 200 this year, based compared to 472. That's for the entire year last year, I believe, correct? Right, Grant? Right. I just wanted to make sure. I looked at those. I forgot to ask him before I came here if that was I just wanted to make sure I was accurate. Didn't want to give you bad information. And the age of arrest, you see, we're at 14, only a couple of them. 15 is 7, 16, 43, and 17, 60. So 112, even though those are down, I think we've also seen, as we talk about and we get into carjackings, a lot of our carjacking patterns with juveniles have subsided because of deployments and arrests and convictions and some of the other things that we're talking about. With that, I'll tell you, and then I'll turn it over to the team, something we put in place yesterday. We've got grant money from the state because, as you know, we're about 500 officers short. So what we're doing is we're offering grant money. Part of that is an incentive for our officers to volunteer to work in our entertainment areas, which is going to be the Inner Harbor, Fells Point, and Federal Hill. But that's not where we stopped. We also gave part of that money, part of those funds to each district to have their own officers, 2 or 3 officers, work the districts and be deployed in the districts. So we can't forget about the districts. So that's all the overtime. That's all going to be on overtime if we get enough people to sign up for it, and we'll constantly maneuver people to make sure we get the best bang for the buck. As well as we have our mobile metro team, and we're going to continue the really successful East Side, West Side initiative that we started several months ago that is it's not only having success in gun arrests and lowering the crime in the areas that they're at, it's giving our young patrol officers experience at doing things that they are the next DAT officer or GVU team that's going to jump into place when somebody moves. And with that, I'll conclude my opening statements and turn it over for you guys for questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate the rundown. I have a ton of questions, and I really want to start before we get into the summer deployment plans. I want to touch on the sort of citywide view and dig a little more into some of what we're seeing in the numbers. First, I want to touch on the homicide and shooting numbers, and this was in, I forget what slides, but we look at the same one every time. We're seeing, of course, a significant increase in homicides in the Southeastern District, and a significant increase in shootings as well in the Southeast District. And then we're seeing a similar trend in the Northeastern District, an increase in homicides and shootings. I also noted we're seeing an increase, very slight increase, but on trend with previous years, actually lower for the Northern District in homicides. So that doesn't really worry me quite as much. But really the shootings are significantly higher than our previous year. Just kind of curious if you wouldn't mind going a little bit into what we know, and I know we talked about this a lot during the budget hearing, so if a lot of it is regurgitated, it's totally fine. I do want to know what more we've learned, and maybe within that context, if we've thought a little bit about how to address some of these known problems in our summer deployment.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is this additional money that we're providing to the districts is going to give them the opportunity to add extra people while not taken from patrol. It's also we move our mobile metro East Side, West Side initiatives. Plus, we have federal partners who are working with us in some of these districts. The Southeast, I think, has settled down a little bit. They're down 20% in shootings in a 28-day, even with homicides. And we can still catch those numbers by the end of the year. We are still struggling with robberies. Last week, they were down slightly, but the 28-day were up a little bit. They seem to get hit with the pattern and get hit 3 or 4 really quick. So that's a deployment thing. We try to move deployment, but what happens is obviously the criminals see where we're at and then they move. The Northeast, we've also done some things. We've had Mobile Metro working there. They got a handgun yesterday right in the area where we wanted them. We had a shooting 2 days ago. The DAT team, I believe it was, got a handgun shortly after, almost in the same area, breaking up a dice game. So the officers are where we are. Their homicides are down 14% in the 28-day, but their shootings are up quite a bit. So we still have a lot of work there. The anomaly is the northern, because the amount of shootings that we have there. I was there for 3 years, I believe, and we had a year like that one time, and what we found is it was displacement. I mean, it was we've actually had done such a good job in some of the other districts that some people started to move there. Plus, it's also a very large district like the Northeast. So some of those things, we look at those and we look at to try to figure out where things happen. And then unfortunately, having 6 people shot in one incident is not having anybody shot, but 6 is an incredible number. And we talked about that the other day. We have some really good info on that. And I think that will get closed eventually. It's just a matter of the detectives have to do their due diligence and get what they need from it. And then what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Colonel Jones and the Lieutenant Colonels to talk more about it.
Yeah, so, specifically when you talk about your summer crime deployment, what we do is we take 5 years worth of data looking analytically over the summer months for those districts. Those districts then, with the use of their analysts, their intel officers, their DAT teams, they focus on through problem scanning of where the specific issues that they want to address, homicide, shootings, robberies. They look for the problem analysis and looking into victimology, suspectology, your high days, your high times, looking for the attractions that may bring individuals to their area, as well as the environmental factors that also play a part of that. That is then culminated with you're looking at your intelligence gaps of what we already know about this area. Is it going to be group member involved? Is it something in reference to some kind of ongoing beef? Is it something else that they need to look into? And then the action plan of how they're going to address it. So we expect the district commanders to look within themselves in the utilization of their officers, their DAT team, their administrative team, their detectives of how they're going to, within themselves, address those issues, and then through the Chief of Patrol's office with the Lieutenant Colonels focusing on those non-committed resources as the PC mentioned, with your DAT teams, your MMU, your K-9, your other non-committed units in reference to getting them the necessary assistance. We realize that and then after that you look at your measuring your activity, then measuring the impact that your activity is having. One conversation that we often have is when we look at proactivity, we just don't want to hear the numbers that were garnered, but was that activity achieving your desired results? And a lot of times, to Lieutenant Colonel Herzog's dismay when he hears directed patrol, we want to know more than directed patrol. We're talking about business checks, foot, getting out of the car, getting engaged, car stops, those kind of things. That can be kind of measured, and then working with our NCOs and the partners in that area, because we realize that this co-productive model of policing just doesn't involve law enforcement, but what is in that area to assist us, be it grassroots organizations, be it MONSE, MOAM, YAP, ROCA, using those outside resources as well. So we have had success for that. So each district in their summer crime plan has identified that specific geography of where they want to address, and then it is up to us either through the weekly crime calls and CompStat to monitor the success that they're having in reference to those geographical areas. I will say that Bel Air Road corridor, they're getting the dosage of not only the Northeast District's outside resources. We know the sheriffs are along that corridor. I had a conversation this morning with Major Pickett of MSP. I know that they're doing things around Route 40 and Route 26 in reference to those feeder areas coming into the city, and we're looking to expand that to other areas throughout the city utilizing our law enforcement partners. But, you know, when it comes to where we need to be, having the officers doing what they need to be doing, we have definitely seen some production in that, and we've seen some decreases in our numbers, but this is something that we're always not satisfied with. You know, as the PC alluded to, anyone who is a victim of a non-fatal shooting or a homicide is something that we definitely hold close to the vest. We had our crime call at 12 o'clock today where we went over the last 2 days worth of violence, where we're looking into the incident itself. Was it group involved? Where's the retaliation going to be? What can be done in reference to victim services? What do we need to do in reference to pushing this ball forward, in reference to identifying not only individuals who may have been involved in it, but where the retaliation, where we think is going to be the actual individual who's going to pick up that gun or do something like that, and then following up on those cases through our evidence control unit and our gun analysis.
Thank you, Colonel. And thank you, Commissioner. I want to acknowledge Councilman Burnett has joined the meeting. And you said a bunch of things, one of which I had on my mind and wanted to ask a little bit about. I know we've talked a lot about limited resources, limited boots on the ground, and I've been thinking a lot about what we could be doing potentially to have force multipliers that are not necessarily officers, but could be community partners, can be technology, can be many things. One of the things this council did very recently, yesterday, the mayor signed the budget. In that budget was some additional money for City Watch and some additional money for home security camera programs, so reimbursements for home security cameras. One of the things I would love, I think it's a great idea we're putting money there, and it was one of the things I hugely advocated for. But I think we also have the opportunity now, knowing where we have these hot spots. I noted a few in going through this information. The Greenspring area and in the Northern District, for instance, we're seeing some heating up there. You mentioned Bel Air Road and also Sinclair Lane. I think are issues that we know we are having issues. I'm not worried. I'm curious what resources, what relationships we have in those areas that can help us extend our tentacles a little bit more effectively. And although we don't necessarily have the ability to put additional boots on the ground, make the boots that are on the ground that much more effective because they have relationships with all the store owners. And we know we do our daily checks. We talk about that all the time here. Or also knowing that more neighbors have home security cameras or home security systems, so that when something happens and the assailant runs past someone's home, we at least have a description of what they're wearing. And that can help us a long way down the line when they hit better cameras or something like that. So I want us to be, I think there's a real opportunity in the summer strategy, one, for us to look at the data historically and what's happening today to figure out where we want to deploy. That's what we can directly control. But we also have indirect recommendation power of sorts with city agencies on where they're going to prioritize where lighting goes. Or 311 requests, cleaning up trash in certain areas where people may be storing things. This is where we can, with this strategy, help other people help us. So I'm curious if we've thought much about that and where we might be able to do more of it.
Yeah, I can answer that, and then I'll turn it over. We have done that. We actually had our CRC meeting yesterday, and we found out that the Western has some issues with lighting. So we asked the citizens to call 311, but our officers to call 311 as well. So those type of things, we're going to look at our microzone strategy. We're not going to do away with it. We're going to keep it with these new districts. Some of our microzones are going to basically are going to be cut between two districts. So we've got to fix that. So some of the hot spots that we know that they're there, we're going to probably have, if they're not included in a microzone, have some type of zone there that we're going to deploy officers, because there's only so many spots that we can hit. If we put 3, say, DAT zones in the Northeast and they only have one team, there's no way they're going to hit 3. So we're going to try to limit the amount of space that they have to cover, but also pick the most important space. And that's going to change depending on day of the week, month where the crime is happening, because we always have to shift the chess pieces. But I think with our DAT teams, with the GVU expansion, the cameras, the City Watch cameras, the BCICs as they move across the city and become, those are a huge tool because they're force multipliers. Also, you have Downtown Partnership is getting ready to start their Strategic Operations Center. That's going to be a force multiplier as well as far as cameras and boots on the ground. So all those things are things that we're constantly looking at, things we've been looking at for months that are hopefully come to fruition this summer, because it's going to be important, because our men and women are going to get used to something different. And then also we're not getting 100 officers anytime soon. I think the next class has only got 20 or 22 in it. So we've got to do with what we have and ask our federal partners. But a lot of the other things that have been done, like the curfew initiative, the squeegee initiatives, the work with the homeless, the padlock initiative. That's one of the big things we can help with these businesses. There's a business in the Northeast that was one of our problematic businesses when I was there, and now we hardly hear anything from them because we met with them, told them what information you had to do. They actually achieved to be able to put I told them they would never be able to put the fence where they put it, and it was actually, everything was approved, and that business has become really not a problematic business. Now, they still have the issues behind it, but those are the type of things that the COP offices lead when they meet with these problematic businesses. We give them suggestions on what we have to do, and then we go out and inspect it with our law department to see if they're compliant. And we have some really great partners, and Carroll Fuel has a lot of the businesses there. They're a huge partner with us that helps us a lot with those. And then I'll turn it over to Colonel Jones and the Lieutenant Colonels.
Yep, I think as the PC said, technology, when we talk about not only the increased number of City Watch cameras, I know I spoke with Director Campbell in reference to ensuring that his staffing numbers in the City Watch are where they need to be, because this new influx of cameras makes a difference. I think currently we're at 800 some cameras. I know that's like 180 in the downtown area. So any cameras that we get is definitely going to be a force multiplier for us. It is something that we look at in reference to post the crime, of not only the individual trying to capture the crime itself, but as you said, the ingress and egress of individuals and vehicles is important to us. That layered on top of our license plate readers and where we put the fixed license plate readers at, I will say the B6 are definitely important in reference to those districts that have them, but I know the mayor and the deputy mayor have priority zones where they've increased specific city services in those areas. So when you talk about the 311 request, the SROs, whether it be the lighting or the forestry or the dirty alleys or just the blight in the community, working with our the DOT in reference to abandoned autos, those things that matter when people walk into a community, that they realize that this community does not tolerate certain things, and certain things won't be done in these communities. So we're definitely looking forward to our partnership in reference to that technology being that force multiplier for us.
And I'm sure my colleague here would probably throw vacants along in that list. I'm going to hand off to my colleagues. Thank you for answering the questions. And I'm going to start this way with Councilwoman Porter. No questions. Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, congratulations, Commissioner. Look forward to working with you. You mentioned that redistricting the button is going to be pushed on July 9th. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. At 7 a.m. on July the 9th, the districts will officially change their boundaries.
And given that that's like right in the middle of the summer, I'm assuming that you have been working with all of the districts to try to make sure that they're prepared for that, because one of the concerns that was brought up by one of my colleagues during budget hearings was just the fact that, new people in a different place, and here we are trying to do this other deployment, So I just want to get a sense of, we're not going to push it back, are we?
No. I think we're in a good place. The commanders have been working, Major Thacker knows what he's inheriting.
He sure does.
The Central knows what they're inheriting when they move across and become the whole entertainment district. And we've been planning for this since we got the district boundaries, because the posts and the sectors, they mean something, but not as much as the district boundaries, because they're still part of the district. So when we start moving resources to cover not only the Inner Harbor with the Central, but also Fells Point, we have to account for that. So we've made those adjustments. We did not, the good thing is, I guess it's good and a bad thing, we offered officers who are in current areas, if they wanted to work and remain in those areas. We only had a few take us up on it, which is fine, but what we won't do is transfer anyone involuntarily. So anybody who's working in the district, and it's probably a good and a bad problem too, because all the districts are already short, and even when we start with the new districts, all the districts are going to be short still. So we've got to try to build it up, and I think we will do that. I think they've been preparing for it. We've been preparing for it because we know it. It's something no one here has ever been through it. Even Colonel Howe, who's been here 40 years, has not been through redistricting. So all the rest of us, it's brand new for us, but we've been preparing for it since we started this thing. I think it's going to be a good thing because it's going to balance out the workload. You won't have the Northeast that has 20 square or 17 square miles of the city and 130,000 of the 600,000 people live here. And it was all done based on calls for services when we got down to the post. And we still may not even be done adjusting the post because we want to continue to look at calls for services and add our constants on how many officers each shift needs. So we talk about this every single day, and I know the colonel and his people are talking with their commanders every single day about it.
So just to play this out, so the post officers in the post in Coldstream, Homestead, Montebello, for instance, right? Let's just say they did not want to move from that post, so they would become Eastern District officers, but they're still there. I don't know if that's the case. I'm just using a hypothetical. Yes. So because we also have a DAT team there as well that we don't want to move, so that means that Thacker is getting that DAT team as well.
Well, actually, he's not. The DAT team is going to remain in the Northeast because the Northeast only has one DAT team. So they're staying in the Northeast because the Northeast still has some problematic areas. Major Thacker has 2 DAT teams, and he's losing also some of Monument Street. So where your DAT teams are there, okay, they can move up. And for district action teams, they may be in a different geography, but the mission is still the same. And we share intel so much that they know each other. We talk about it on the crime call all the time, and our intel officers have been talking to each other. And I know that they can add more about all the behind the scenes preparation we've done because we've never done it before, and we got to make sure it's right.
Well, part of the adapting is also not just calls for service, but also that being proactive. Again, in those transition areas in particular where we actually need presence and the communities are asking for presence, that isn't just based on calls for service. And I know I've talked with Major Thacker about this. And I would imagine that every single council person has also talked with the majors that they're inheriting to be able to, work with them on how this is going to work. So, I'm sure there'll be a little couple bumps in the road. That's just how it goes. But hopefully not anything that results in a fatality, because that would definitely be bad. But I think that obviously Northeast is, looking forward to that. And I've been impressed with what's going on in Eastern. I mean, that's pretty significant, that drop. So hopefully that'll go forward. My second question is on the part of the summer crime issue it is important to address homicides and non-fatal shootings, but we also have all of the other property crimes go up, so many other things. So you talked about the Kia and Hyundai issue. We've put out the word to our districts that, we need to get people to, get those thingies. And so wondering, you had mentioned that there's other methods that you're trying to do to get people to pick up the, what are the things called? I have one. I don't know. Thank you. And so, count us as partners because we want to be able to get the word out so people will go and pick it up. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. What we're looking at, we're going to probably set up 2 or 3 central locations at different times. Instead of having them go to a district, set something up where they can come and drive through, show us their ID, show us the title to the car, and we'll hand them a club. Because the quicker we get them out there, the less likely they are to be a victim of stolen autos. So those are some of the things, and our PIO is working on that where, when, and how we're going to facilitate it. But that's in the works so we can get the clubs out and stop the stolen autos, or at least slow them down as much as we can.
So you're going to go to areas that you've seen high concentrations of the stolen autos, and then just sort of
Yes.
park yourself at some corner and say, hey, come get the,
Yeah,
okay.
we're gonna go to hotspots, but we're also gonna use, each district, as they have their community meetings, they're gonna be taken to the community meetings as well. Because, someone who lives in the city may also, be a patron somewhere else in the city and become victimized. So we don't wanna just do the hotspot areas, we wanna give everybody a chance who is affected with those Kia and Hyundai models that are in that series. So, and we're also looking at how successful would it be for an officer or two in a sector to have a club in their vehicle, or steering wheel device in their vehicle, and as they come up upon a person who needs it, who has a vehicle that matches that time frame or that model, to be able to give them a club real time on scene. So we're looking holistically at how best to blanket the entire city.
Great. Again, count us as partners. As soon as you get that, let us know so we can get it out. Thank you. I have more questions, but I'll wait till the next round.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I want to acknowledge Councilman Costello has joined the meeting. Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, to you and your team. Welcome to the hot seat. You've been around a long time, so it's all good. The question I had was around the, here we go. Sorry, I was trying to get the slides up. So we're seeing a lot of narcotics and handgun arrests, but what are the overlap between the handgun violations that are connected to the homicides? Because I think, from my lens, I think that there's, not that those other areas shouldn't be areas of emphasis, but I guess how often are we seeing that there's, connections to that? And the second question, as far as like the guns that you're getting being connected to other crimes, the second, I saw that the Maryland Supreme Court weakened ballistics testing. Can you, I guess, sort of walk us through how that impacts your work, or how that will or may impact your work moving forward as far as the clearance rate and the ability to sort of translate investigations from the gun arrest to the actual homicides?
Hi, Erin Murphy on behalf of BPD, Director of Government Affairs. I will let them speak to the gun arrests. I had an opportunity to read that opinion, and I saw the article in the paper. When you look at that, it is critical about some of the ballistic science, but part of that opinion was, and if you look at it, it was that it was an unqualified opinion. It was almost a battle of the experts in that case. So I think the court was giving us guidance, and we're going to work with our lab and go through exactly what happened in that particular case, because it was the expert who testified on behalf of the science, but yet was giving what they considered to be an unqualified opinion. So I think the Court of the Supreme Court now, it used to be the Court of Appeals, but the Supreme Court was taking an opportunity to explain the science, but also giving a cue about how an expert could properly testify to it. So I do not believe necessarily they were throwing out the tool, but definitely giving us guidance, and we were specifically on setting up a meeting with our lab to make sure that we understood the science behind it, because obviously, I'm not a scientist, but so we plan on meeting about that and figuring out how we're going to make sure that our lab people can testify in court and not have that same unqualified opinion.
Once you all, I guess, have a new protocols, could you share those with the council? I think it would be helpful, because for me that was very concerning to see that tool. I didn't quite understand the context, obviously, so that's helpful. But I think just wanting to know the impact, because I know that in the past we've done initiatives with the feds to try and increase capacity of the department's ability to sort of make these connections, and so I was deeply concerned that that would impact investigations.
I absolutely will, after we have an opportunity to meet with the lab and confirm. But I think the headline was definitely scary, but I think if you look at the context of the opinion, I think it was direction. But we want to make sure that we are up on how to testify. I'm sure we will also, I know I specifically will reach out to the state's attorney's office, because that's the coordination between the preparation that may have gone wrong.
Okay.
So absolutely, we can fill the council in.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question?
So we had 670 handgun violations. There were 51 arrests for murders. I was just trying to figure out, obviously there's a lot of guns on the street. Not all of them are involved in murders or non-fatal shootings, but was trying to figure out what the trend, you may not have this data in front of you, but I guess even if it's an anecdote, like what the number of guns that you're finding on the street that are connected to either non-fatal shootings or fatal shootings. Because there's a lot of gun arrests, but we're still seeing some downward trends in fatal shootings, but obviously still a troubling amount.
Yep, good afternoon, Councilman. So I can't speak to the number of guns that have linked back to shootings, but just to give a little bit of context to it. So like in terms of all of our non-fatal shootings year to date, there's been 103 NIBIN leads that connect those cases together. So that's through ballistics, but also through firearms. So there's a fairly good amount of cases that we're able to connect through this technology through ballistics.
And my other question sort of dovetails on the, I guess, earlier question about like the ballistics. Are we still working with federal entities to expand capacity to try and drive down or drive up, I guess, the clearance rate? Looks like we're doing pretty well this year compared to last year, which was somewhere around 39%, I think it said, or yeah, 39% up to 45% is a good thing. Still below the national average, and so figuring out what other relationships or resources are being pulled in from our federal partners to try and expand the department's capacity on that end.
Yeah, we have a really good partnership with ATF. We basically, the NIBIN program, we are building our NIBIN team. We have an analyst, we added an officer, and we're going to add a sergeant. So then we want to see how much they're going to work with some of our DAT and our GVU units to investigate some of these NIBIN leads. So we are building that. We've got a great partnership with them. We've got a meeting coming up here in probably the next couple of weeks, where the state's attorney, ATF, us, and a couple of our other partners are going to sit down and talk about what more we can do to increase the NIBIN program. And if anyone else has anything else to add, I'm excited about where the program's going, because we can utilize it more because it's a huge tool. I am concerned about that recent ruling, but we'll have to let the lab people, who are a lot smarter than me with that stuff, figure that out.
Yep, no, that's something that we talk with our federal partners monthly, with our federal partners meeting in the PC's boardroom. ATF has been a stalwart with us in reference to their availability in trying to help Baltimore City. But I will also say, we have one of the premier crime labs in the area. Our crime labs goes around and has received several awards in reference to the fine work that they're doing. So we're holding our own within ourselves, but we're more than willing to take the assistance from our federal partners.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. I want to go back to the slides, and I think on slide 5, for gun-related arrests. I noticed a couple of things. One, our total number of gun arrests is up by 16, which is great. Getting more guns off the street is always good news for us here. I want to just point out a couple of things on that slide. So first, for the Eastern District, just wow. The Eastern District went from 36 gun arrests last year to 105 this year, which is insane. They're doing incredible work there, and we're seeing the returns, of course, in reductions in homicides, shootings, you name the crime, it's gone down in the Eastern District. I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about what's going on there, and certainly it's good. Not great that there are 105 guns on the street to begin with, but nonetheless, I would love to hear a little bit about what's going on there.
Yep, so for the Eastern District, I think you have a culmination of a lot of things. You have 2 commanders in place that are engaged and consistently pushing their people for better. They have, a lot of things going on because they're one of the few districts that does have a BSIC. So they have people who are constantly monitoring cameras, looking for characteristics of armed persons and other things that may lead to a handgun arrest. They also have 2 DAT teams. So you're getting double the DAT exposure by those officers who are crime focused for crime suppression. So you get a lot of that also coupled with, we have an East Side and West Side initiative. So your East Side initiative can be utilized along that Merriman Street corridor, as well as when the Eastern was having some issues, we were supplying them with the mobile metro team as well as SWAT. So that combination of all of those things, looking for those individuals who are actively in possession of the guns, monitoring our cameras, using our intel from our BSIC officers, intel from our intel officer, has resulted in a robust increase in our handguns.
You said BSIC?
Yeah, Baltimore Crime Intelligence Center.
Got it, thank you.
And I just add that I think also the major and the leadership there is in community all the time, building trust. And so we're actually getting information that I don't think that we would have gotten before.
Thank you. And continuing on the gun-related arrests, and I noted a couple other things. In the Western District, we see a slight decrease, roughly 20 from 95 to 77 in the number of gun arrests. And we see almost the same increase in arrests and gun arrests from 59 to 83, and it's not perfect, but in the Southwest. I'm curious, is that what I think it is? I'm assuming it's the change in our focus from GVRS, but maybe that's wrong. I just want to kind of keep.
No, I think that's partially right, because we have moved some resources into the Southwest. Plus, we had some indictments that got a good amount of guns off the street last year in the Western. And just the fact that when we were making so many gun arrests, they may be a little more hesitant to carry a gun in the Western now because of all the officers that have been there and all the arrests that we made last year. I think those are some of it, but also in the Southwest, they've done some really good work with their BCIC, as well as the Western. They both have BSICs. The only other one that has one is the Central. That's Central, Southwest, Western, and Eastern. So I think some of those things that they're doing, they've also been utilized in search and seizure warrants. And it also doesn't help when GVU starts to expand into the Southwest and you've got a few more officers there helping the district action teams in both of those districts. So it could be a little bit of displacement, but I think it's still just some of the indictments. And then the Southwest went up significantly. They were a little lower last year, but they're up around 83 right now. So I think that's part of, you're hit on part of it.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Councilman, I also, just for the Southwest, just speaking to them, their district action team has been phenomenal, like over the past 2 years. So they were down in crime last year as well for a calendar year of 2022. Did a really good job. This year, they're also even below where they were last year. So they're doing a phenomenal job. They've seen some hits in Morrill Park and on the southern end of the district, where we've had to put some things in place and shift some resources and things down there. But overall, their deployments have been very strong, and that command team there has done a good job. In terms of the Western District, I think what the commissioner said is, a lot of that is really true. They've had a really strong DAT team as well, but they've had some staffing issues as well to keep that staff up to where it needs to be. Their BCIC has done a phenomenal job with using the resources that they have in their intelligence center. And their DDU has several cases right now that are on the cusp of being closed, where we have persons of interest identified, which we feel like are going to have an additional impact heading into the second and the latter half of the year to hopefully continue to see those downward trends that we have.
And
Appreciate
I
that.
think
Thank
we
you.
also touched at the budget meeting, our GVU unit was down personnel for transfers, and we just added 3 people, but 1 left and went to Public Integrity Bureau. And we do plan to get them back up. They were 7 short, they're now 5 short. I just want to spread it out over the pay periods, and over every 2 weeks we'll add a couple, just so we're not taking 7 people, because most of the time it's a trickle-down effect. If we take 7 to GVU, they're coming from patrol or they're coming from DAT, and then DAT has to backfill. So we're trying to span that out so when the new class comes out, we're not hit quite as hard. But they'll be back up to full strength too. So the good portion of this year, they were operating at lower strength, and that could be some of the issues why we've seen the lower gun totals in the Western.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I want to circle back to the shooting I had in my district last week. We mentioned earlier six folks were injured. No homicides that I know of yet. But it really shook the community. I went to a community meeting yesterday in the morning where folks were really, really frustrated. Interestingly, the community meeting was called before the shooting happened. This is literally on the same block. Some of the frustrations that folks in the room had well before the shooting even happened were around enforcement of open-air drug markets, drug corners, the loitering that kind of goes on and continues to be an issue. Really tough questions to answer when I'm not able to pull the strings there. I'm curious how we as a department are thinking about this, especially going into the summer. We know that it's warm, there are going to be more people out, it's going to be a little bit more competitive. We know that competition then brings violence sometimes. How are we thinking about addressing these issues? Because I can tell you, folks are really frustrated, and we can't just say we're working on it, it takes time.
That area is, unfortunately, has been a challenging area, even when I was in the Northern in 2008 to 2012. But what we are doing, I think some of that overtime money that we're giving, that's going to give them additional people. That's not going to come out of their budget. That's not counting the additional resources that they have. Like, for example, I know that night in particular, they had two initiative officers, but nobody signed up for the overtime. So that's probably where they would have been if we had someone sign up for the overtime. But that is an area where we have to address the open-air drug markets. I think what we have is we have the ability to use citations now. And not only is that going to give us the opportunity to keep people accountable, but it's also going to get some of our citizens who suffer from drug addiction, if they get a citation, they go to court, the judge can order them to go to drug treatment. In the past, we've had to rely, over the last several years, we've had to rely on them to reach out and seek help themselves. So I think if we can do some of that and rehab some of them, but also it's just also putting more cops where we think we're going to get violence, and that's the big key, is coming up with working more with less. And I think that some of that overtime money is what's going to help us a great deal. And I know the COP office has some initiatives planned for the summer as well.
Yep, so this kind of goes back to that summer crime plan. So the Northern District had already submitted that York Road corridor was going to be a focus of theirs, specifically that 46 to 5400 block of the corridor and that zone in that area. I will say when it comes to those quality of life and lesser offenses, I think this is where we're going to see the utilization of citations going forward, empowering the officers to be engaged. But I'm not also always looking at that carrot piece of it, but I'm looking at, the stick piece, but the carrot as well. When we have those historically resource-resistant areas and individuals who, for whatever reason, would like to congregate either on bus stops or in front of businesses, this is for me, an opportunity for our neighborhood coordinating officers, our supervisors to get engaged with them. Everything does not have to result in enforcement. Sometimes it's having a conversation of, there are other things out here, there are better things out here that we can do, and providing those resources to individuals. And sometimes it's just the agitation of the water. If I know that, this post officer is going to be on me, this DAT officer is going to be here now, and then 10, 20, 30 minutes later now an NCO officer is coming up, talk to me about choices that I'm making and the probability of something happening here. I think it's all of those things together, but I really do believe that going forward, citations will play a big part of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think a couple of things, we got to make sure we get that right, being sensitive to potentially over-enforcing for certain people that look a certain way in certain neighborhoods. We are all aware of the history of the department and issues around there. That's why we are currently in a consent decree. So we have to be very sensitive to that. I agree with you. I think there's a lot of work that we can do on the front end, which is the carrot, providing the largest, biggest, juiciest carrot we possibly have. But what I'll say is, in some instances, that carrot is shown once, and then, they say no, and nothing happens, carrot nor stick. And I think, we need to figure out that process. At what point do we say enough is enough? So I think there's a very delicate balance there for which I think we're still honestly working out, and that's okay. But I think every day that it takes us longer to set those boundaries and clear expectations of folks on those corners, it opens up the door to instances like we've seen on Friday. To that end, talking about young people, we also had an incident over the weekend in the district, just a couple of blocks away at Walter P. Carter, with vandalism of the school. My assumption is one or two or maybe more young people went to the school and threw rocks at all the windows. Now, mind you, this is a brand new 21st century school, spent millions, tens of millions of dollars to build it. Beautiful school, probably one of the nicest schools I've ever seen in my life. A huge boon to the community, huge asset to the community. Some young people went out there and just smashed all the windows in the school, destroyed the playground. I know, and I'm going to pose this question to Monty. One of the big things that we decided to do is do a summer engagement initiative for our young people. This incident screams to me boredom. Now, it could very well have been an adult that was frustrated at somebody who worked there, or who knows, I don't know, that's possible. But I'm really curious about how we're thinking about that deployment, that effort, and what returns we're beginning to see now early summer for our young people, so that these things don't continue to happen.
I mean, I think the quick and easy answer is to say one of the most prominent summer engagement plans is the Youth Engagement Summer Plan. And from that, in terms of the numbers, we fortunately haven't seen youth victimizations for shootings, homicides, and we have not been seeing, we've had no youth actually transported to either the centers, but we've had a lot of on-the-ground engagement from We Are Us, from school police, and from the engagement team that included, during the budget hearings, you heard the CAO and others. That's an example of various staff members who have been out engaging with young people. So anecdotally, we've had reports of conflicts averted or mediated before they happen, as they were boiling, things like that. And in addition to that, MOCFS is really focused this summer on providing opportunities, et cetera. So, I think common sense, big picture, the better job we do throughout the summer of actually, as you said, having kids who are not bored and are actually engaged in things, it's similar in a classroom, I think. Teachers would say the same thing, right? That to prevent things like what you just described happening, if it happened, if it was the result of youth, obviously the solution is to have them engaged.
I think part of the nuance in these issues is that it's not necessarily violence. It's vandalism, or it may be, theft or something like that, where young people are just doing the wrong things in the wrong places at the wrong times. Like, they should be doing something productive, fun, and I'm not sure if we're really having. It sounds like we're having some opportunities to connect with young folks. I don't know. I would love to have a more robust conversation about what we're seeing out of the program, and if there are ways to make sure that we're connecting, not with all youth, because not all youth need it, but certainly the youth that need it most, so that things like this, kids that are on the edge and more likely to do things like this or otherwise are getting the help and attention and support that they need, so that they have better things to do.
Yeah, and just to add to that point, I do think we have to be really cognizant of the fact that it is, that there's a progression, so that we talk a lot about the highest risk individuals that you were just mentioning, and I think with the prevention task force and the intensive case management through the schools that we're really focusing on, also through to head into next fall, that's very clearly saying, okay, identifying kids who are most at risk, right? But I do think that when you're talking about vandalism or other things that are happening when people are bored, it's easy, given the context that we're in now, for that, a lot of that to boil over into violence, and we want to be aware of sort of having programming that also gets kids before they're at that point. So we're definitely focused on that.
Thank you. I see Councilman Cohen, you've got your hand up, and I think you've had it up for a while. I apologize for not seeing you.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Acting Commissioner, and to your team. Acting Commissioner, you mentioned some of the partnerships with federal partners. I am curious, as you step into this potential new role, what about state partners? I know that we have a governor that is very willing to assist and has, in many ways, I think, already stepped up for Baltimore. I am curious how you are working with our state delegation partners, with our governor, his team, the public safety folks in his office, to try to increase and enhance the work that BPD is doing.
Yes, sir. I actually got a call from Governor Moore last Saturday, and he offered his help. We have state police who did a traffic initiative down, I believe, with this past weekend. They're going to come in, and that's one of the things that we're going to also deploy. They're going to come in and do some initiatives for us. And I also have a really good relationship with the new superintendent. He and I worked together in our previous roles. So those are some of the things that we're going to try to use Maryland Department of Transportation officers, and we also are going to try to use MTA officers whenever we can. They help us a great deal at the bus stops, so we're going to use a lot of those resources. But I think the big thing is the MSP are coming in with the traffic enforcement in the areas where we're going to have a lot of people moving about who probably shouldn't be driving, and they are going to be the force multiplier that's kind of be on the outside as we work the inside of it. And we also have help from our sheriffs. Our sheriffs are down in Fells Point every weekend with us. There's 6 or 7 deputies that are down there working Fells Point. We have a few school police officers, and we're going to try to increase that relationship. And the Governor's Office on Crime Prevention, we're working with them a great deal in a lot of different things that are moving forward, especially with some of the things we used to do in the past were inspections of businesses where we use some of the state resources. So lots of things that I want to try to do, but I've only been there for 2 weeks, so I need a little bit of time to try to build some of it. And then if anyone else has anything else that they're doing with the state.
Yep, so, we talk about DPSCS in reference to public safety and corrections. We talk about Department of Juvenile Services. I know the PC mentioned MDTA, so we're working closely with them, not only around the downtown area, but also in reference to the arteries leading into the city. So we have a robust relationship already existing with our partners, and we just expect that relationship to improve as we go along.
And we also
That's
have,
great to
we also
Sorry,
have
go
the
ahead.
Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. They're constantly in Fells Point with us when and the Chris Amalis, Director Chris Amalis, or Chief Chris Amalis, he works, I think, every single weekend with us down in hitting all these businesses that are problematic with serving underage kids and selling alcohol against their license, in violation of their license. So we have a task force that goes out every Friday and Saturday night, and we get a list of the businesses that we want to try to visit with all of our partners to see. And that comes from our district commanders sending it in to a central depository, and then they set up the certain amount of businesses that we can hit each weekend. And then we go back to see if they've paid their violations, if there are violations. So everything that we can use to be a force multiplier to the amount of officers on the street, we're going to use it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate hearing that. I think it is critically important that we operate through partnership. And I will say that I think with the previous administration, it was sometimes a challenge and at times felt more transactional. But I think with this administration in Annapolis, there's a real desire and will to support and not just throw stones at how dysfunctional our department is, but actually like assist in the crime fight. And so I'm glad to hear, Acting Commissioner, that you've already started to build that relationship with the governor and with his team. My second question is, there was an article in Baltimore Magazine a couple weeks back, and it made a kind of provocative claim around the DAT teams, essentially saying that in some ways they were like a retread of past plainclothes units that caused some instability and could maybe go get guns, but also could disrupt cohesion in neighborhoods. That kind of stuck in my head, and I don't feel like anyone's touched it publicly. I'm curious from your perspective. I've heard you talk a lot about the DAT teams. If you could share what they do and really what they do differently than like the Gun Trace Task Force did, or some of the previous attempts that have gotten us into constitutional problems. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. The biggest thing that's different from some of the other issues that we've had in the past is supervision. There's usually a DAT team. The span of control is usually 6 to 8 detectives. Most districts have 4 to 6. And they all have a sergeant. Those sergeants answer to a lieutenant, who answers to a captain, who answers to a major, and a lieutenant colonel, and all the way up to the colonel. So the span of control is the most important part of that, because our officers basically know what the mission is, and they go out and they're going to get complaints because they're tackling the most violent offenders in the city. And another big advantage of them is they rarely answer calls for service, so they don't have to listen. They have to listen to the radio, but they don't have to be guided by the radio as to going to a call for service. So they can spend their whole time being proactive. Also, our sharing of intel. Our officers know exactly where and when most of our criminals are going to be around. And even with our patrol officers, we have an app on our phone that you can link onto the app. For example, if an officer wants to work another district overtime, they go to that district, they hit the app, and it tells you everything about that area that you're working. But mainly, they're going to be doing investigations as we move across the city with GVU and the GVRS strategy. We're going to employ the DATs. They've already been doing this. It's just a more structured as we do the violence reviews, and the fact that it's going to be a people-based philosophy and strategy. And we hope that people take the services and we don't have to be the enforcement end of it. But unfortunately, we are going to be needed. And as the GVU moves across the city, for example, the Western DAT team is doing their own thing now with an investigation that is similar to what GVU was doing, and soon it'll be the Southwest and the Central and the Eastern as we move across. So those are all the things, but the two biggest things, you have to have proper supervision, you have to have oversight, plus we look at it every week on Thursday in CompStat. We look at what they're doing, where they're doing, how they're doing it, how much time they're using. So all those things are done to make sure our DAT members are in the correct places and doing what they need. Also, the last thing is, when we started the DAT team, I was part of the initial restructuring of the team. And then the colonels and lieutenant colonel take it now. In order to get in a district action team, we look at your background, we look at everything about what you've done as an officer, and to make sure that we don't have any issues when we put you in a DAT team, because you have some freedom there, and we have to make sure we trust our officers. And I think the men and women have done a fabulous job of putting the right people in the right places, and 500 officers short, and they're still out there doing a fabulous job.
I think the PC hit it on the head, that there is a process in place in reference to looking at the background and the holistic of an individual, of where they stand. You know, either the early intervention of things that we see. I know to date, I think we are 96% down in release without charges as an agency. So that shows where we are in reference to where we used to be. One thing I would also say is, you know, we are very robust through our education and training in reference to stop, searches, and arrests, and providing all members of the agency what the constitutionality looks like when we come into contact with the community. Although our DAT arm of the agency is based on crime suppression, every member of this agency is an ambassador of peace, is an ambassador of community. So just because that's a DAT officer does not mean that they can't get out their car and help somebody change a tire or stop and play, basketball with the children or interact with the community. They're all of that. We're not just, that monolithic approach of smash, mouth policing. We are actually doing both, of being that guardian in the community, of providing crime suppression as well as community engagement.
And one of the biggest thing was actually pointed out by somebody behind me, sent me a text message to remind me that with our district action teams, they are not the plainclothes units of the past. They have a uniform. It's not the same uniform that we're wearing, but they have their polo shirt, khakis, or BDUs, and they have, the most important is they have the vest that clearly says police on the front and back, has their name tag, and that's one of the biggest things, is they're clearly identifiable. So those are some of the main reasons why they're different and why we won't have the same issue we had in the past.
One thing that we are continuing
Commissioner.
with is that that ethical policing is courageous. So, we're empowering every officer, no matter who it is, if you see something wrong, to interfere with it, to say something, and that's all the way up to myself. If you feel that I'm doing something that is inappropriate, everybody has that ability to engage that. I think because of that, because of those pins that these officers are wearing, individuals are less likely to take that chance.
I appreciate
Councilman,
that.
can I add
One
just
of
one
the
thing?
important pieces I think that we all appreciate is you want to trust but verify. I know one of the things we used to do was integrity checks. Do we still do integrity checks? And at what rate do we do them? Do they match or monitor, or do they match at all what the historic rate was that we used to do?
That would have to be a follow-up, because honestly, they don't tell us. That's how we keep it separate. They don't tell us when they're doing them, how many they've done. They tell us when somebody has been caught in one of those, and it goes all the way up to the Deputy NATO will give me a report, but I don't even ask about them. That's their thing. They'll keep it separate from us, tell us when there's a problem, when they discovered a problem, so we can work on it and fix it.
Yeah, I love that as a follow-up. Thank you.
I mean, Councilman, just to, kind of speaking to that a little bit. So the other thing that we didn't have in the past with our plainclothes units was body-worn cameras. And so that's something that every officer has now. Our DAT teams utilize them. Every arrest is reviewed by our audits and inspections unit from compliance. And so that's something that we obviously didn't have in years past. And so, not necessarily an integrity check that I'm speaking to, but everything is looked at for integrity, and are we doing the right thing? Are we following our own policies? And if not, there's a level of accountability. That doesn't just happen at the audits and inspections and compliance level. District commanders are doing that. Uses of force are being reviewed at every single level, all the way up to our use of force unit. And so there's a whole different level of accountability and oversight that we have now and have had now for several years that we didn't have before.
No, I definitely appreciate all of that, and it's really helpful. I think the key thing is folks have to trust this department in order to come forward and testify and be witnesses and speak up when there's crime. And we know from the past that when there isn't trust, it leads to increased crime, and folks don't get caught because people don't trust the department. And so I think it's just really important that we're striking the balance. And so my last kind of follow-up on this is what you mentioned body-worn cameras, you mentioned that they're not plainclothes, but are there any other guardrails in place to know if we are starting to go off a cliff of heading in a direction that could be unconstitutional or could get us in trouble with the consent decree? Because, I think the drive to go get guns and go get guns off the streets and to get violent criminals, I think is critically important. But if we're not careful, and if it's done in ways that are either unconstitutional or just not good policing, the impact, I think, can be destabilizing and can actually lead to more crime and less relationship with community. So are there any other guardrails? The chair mentioned integrity checks, but anything else to keep it from tipping over?
Yeah, there are several other things. One of them is basically through the workday system. There's supervisors have to approve their hours, and then we monitor how much overtime they make. There's a cap on how much overtime they make. Our fiscal section basically shows our top earners, and we look to see what we're getting and make sure that everything is above board. But workday was a huge advantage. I think that is going to be that was a game changer, because no longer can you do that. There's no longer just signing something for a supervisor. And the good thing is our supervisors are really stringent on that. They don't want to put their name or be associated with anything that is going to be not on above board. So some of those things are some of the other things that we've done to try to make sure that we keep all of our officers in line, not just the DAT teams, but everyone.
No, I think the PC just hit what I was going to say is the guardrail is not just for our DAT teams, it's for all of our officers. Of course, not to use a line from Spider-Man, but where there's great responsibility, you got to have that oversight. So we're giving the DAT teams a lot of leeway to do things that most officers don't. So with that responsibility is then heightened. I think everything that we mentioned in reference to early intervention, in reference to our compliance unit, in reference to PIB, in reference to EPIC, in reference to our training, all of these things is a combination of keeping every individual accountable in reference to constitutional policing and providing a work product to our community, our citizens, that they deserve and need.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm going to hand off to Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two other questions. One is, Commissioner, you were talking about the additional money that you received for overtime. It was my understanding that, given the vacancies in the department, that money isn't transferred anywhere else. It's actually used for overtime. And so and then there's usually a balance that's left over at the end and goes into fund balance. So what is this additional money, and why do we need it if we're able to carry over so much money?
Well, our overtime budget, we obviously want to stay within the budget. So our normal staffing shortage, that usually comes out of the BPD budget, but the governor's office gave us a SAP grant to help us with police presence. And that's where we're able to offer the overtime, the incentive money to pay the officers additional money for every 2-hour block that they work. And that doesn't get applied to the city's budget. It comes out of a special grant, which we do through Workday. When they enter the overtime, that's what we were just talking about a few minutes ago. When these men and women work it, we have to make sure we enter the correct overtime code so that Workday picks it up to go to that SAP grant that's from the governor's office. It's from everybody's office, but it's from the governor's office, that everything gets put to that and doesn't get put against the city budget. So that.
Do you anticipate then that there would be a surplus because there's not of the state money, but the fact that we're not going to use as much overtime?
No, there won't be a surplus, because we probably wouldn't be putting these officers out there without that SAP grant, because if not.
It's an additional incentive?
Yes,
Is it
ma'am.
more than time and a half? Is that what it is? Oh, okay, I got it now.
Because every time and a half that they can work anywhere, but we're trying to attract people who know it's going to be a tough job where we're putting them. So we give them a little extra incentive to sign up for it, and then we can put them out and we can maneuver them around. But that's all extra money that won't be applied to the BPD budget, which still gives us the opportunity to pay, like the districts are still going to be paying other officers to do initiatives. This money just comes out of, it's kind of like a bonus for us to use that we probably wouldn't have the funds to do if it wasn't for that grant money.
Okay, I got it now. I appreciate that. Thank you. And then second question, totally unrelated. I get emails all the time about the catalytic converter theft. Again, not related to homicides or shooting, but the property crimes and quality of life crimes obviously make a difference. So can you tell me? Obviously, you can't go through the whole thing because we don't want to, let your strategy out. But just to assure us that you've got a strategy and what we should be telling residents in terms of prevention or, scraping the serial number? What is it that we're doing to make sure that are we tracing these folks so that, because there's been arrests across the country related to this. So tell us a little bit more about, what the department is doing.
Yeah, this has actually been a problem since 2003. I was a sergeant in the Southwest, and we were having people stealing catalytic converters off of Wilkins Avenue. We'd love to have everyone engrave some kind of serial number or something on their catalytic converter, but the possibility of that is tough. So what we're doing is once we see where we're getting, and if you looked at the larceny numbers, I don't believe that's in part of larceny from auto because it's a part. So it's included in the other numbers, but those are still very high too. And what we do, once we see that there's 2 or 3 or 4 in the area, our officers will start to go to some of these scrap yards to see, okay, who's pawning these things, who's selling them, and we have a recidivist list we've been arresting people for this since 2003, so we know where some of the frequent flyers are, and we can look at them for that. But a lot of it is just as much omnipresence as we can on midnight because it's really easy to do. You jump up under a car, and I think you can be out of there in 10 minutes with the catalytic converter. And the victim doesn't know until they go to start their car up. So those are some of the things. It's just a really tough crime to combat. But we're doing everything we can and we can put out flyers,
Is it
put out everything.
simply a scrapyard issue, or is it like, honestly, some of the things that I've been seeing across the country is that it's like a organized thing.
It's a little bit of both. So I will say that what the PC said, if you're going to get some work done on your vehicle, get it engraved while it's already up and off the ground. For those who have a certain financial wherewithal, there are certain kits that you could put on it to block it from being taken. I know our BPD Facebook page and other websites are constantly pushing out these tips to individuals of where you park, being mindful of those things. I will say in reference to addressing it as a law enforcement entity is that this is a focus for our regional auto theft task force as well as our pawn shop unit, that they are working collaboratively of working from the geography of where it's happening and then who is going to be the end user of that product when they finally get it. So we're looking at all aspects of that.
Yeah, because that's the issue, is like, how much they're offering for that, and who is it, and all of that. So I think it's got to be more organized. It sounds to me like it's more organized.
And our PIO has put out, they made a flyer, they sent it to me, we put it out periodically to advise people, give them the
Yeah,
best
I've put it in
advice.
my newsletter a couple
Yes.
times, yeah.
Prevention is, unfortunately, it's a constant battle with trying to locate these individuals at night, usually over the midnight shift.
Oh, we had one stolen in the middle of the day recently. So I think it's sort of all over, but it is something that we need to really concentrate on. So hopefully you're putting the resources in where it's needed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Burnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So 2 quick questions. One is around, I know you mentioned earlier, Acting Commissioner, about partnerships with the state and the Sheriff's Department on traffic enforcement. But generally speaking, there just sort of seems to, at least this is my perception and that of my constituents, that the department largely doesn't do a whole lot of traffic enforcement. And we get a lot of calls about speeding, running stop signs. Again, these are sort of quality of life issues, but it's like death by 1,000 cuts for a lot of our constituents that are also concerned about the violent crime as well. Can you speak to what the department is doing to sort of change that both perception and to some degree reality, because I'm sure you're chasing down a lot of other calls around just traffic safety, traffic enforcement, because we get a lot of accidents, pedestrians being struck, and people, and not just generally a lot of complaints about people just feeling like folks are just not observing any of the red lights or stoplights. So what are we doing on that end to increase just general traffic enforcement, in addition to obviously the work that DOT is doing and try and just make streets safer? There does need to be enforcement on that end.
Well, one of the biggest problems is since COVID, people just drive erratically. I mean, they're like, it's almost like the traffic laws are or an option. It's something that we can enforce. We have a traffic unit that does it. Our mobile metro unit, most of their stops are car stops. Just for example, I know yesterday we made, as an agency, I believe it was 275 car stops in one day. That's throughout the city. So we look at that every single day to see where we're stopping them. But if you have those areas where you need enforcement, we can't do it every day, but we have a unit that can go and do some of the enforcement. But every one of our officers is trained to do car stops. Like for me, when I was an officer, that was my big thing. I wasn't very good with drugs, so I like to do cars. I like to do the car stops. So, and some officers don't like car stops, some do. You just have to find what you like to do. And we had an officer in the Northeast, he would stop 15 cars a night on midnight shift because it was a little bit slower. But I think every single officer is trained. They're field sobriety trained when they come through the academy, so they can use those tools. And we get a lot of guns out of cars. They're being transported across the city because no longer are West Side criminals staying on the west side and East Side criminals staying on the east side. They're moving across the city, and the way to get the gun there is through a vehicle. So we've been pushing and pushing for car stops, and a lot of it is just traffic violations or a repair order. But when we do have those incidents, like I know we did, Hillen Road is historically, it's like a speedway sometimes. And we put the traffic officer, one who wants to do radar, LiDAR, right at the top where the district comes out to Argonne, and you just pick people off coming up there 60, 70 miles an hour. So we can strategically do it. We do, the chief's office does put our units out there to address all these issues because those are issues that, I mean, I see them too driving through the city.
Yeah, I think one of the things that may be helpful, because I know Department of Transportation, it collects vehicle data when we are all inundated with traffic camera requests and speed light requests, and typically before they deploy any of those tools, they're collecting data on how many vehicles are coming through a particular intersection before deciding on if that camera should be there, and then there's obviously a waiting period because you have to take one camera from one place, put it somewhere else. I think I would love to see more collaboration with DOT, especially if they're in that window where the department has determined that an area should be eligible for a speed camera or some sort of code, intervention, but they don't may not necessarily have it available yet. I mean, seems like it just be, using the data to say, look, we may not have the camera available, but this particular intersection is problematic. Same with crash data. I have, give an example, Calvin Rodwell up at Liberty Heights and Hillsdale. We had back-to-back incidents with children getting hit in the crosswalk with crossing guards there. And so, again, working with the Department of Transportation in the interim to come up with a plan, but in the short run, there's a need for more traffic safety there while we know it's a problem. Like, you don't need the camera to tell us that or the deployment to tell us that. Like, we've had these incidents and we have the crash data. And so I just think if there's an opportunity to be more proactive without, I'm not going to always reach out to you guys and say, look, I need this, I'm hearing these kind of things, and you respond. But, I'm always the kind of person that it shouldn't be really up to me to make that call. If we have the crash data, we have the speed data, we know where the problems are. It's just about being a little more proactive when you have the available resources to sort of have that data drive the decision making.
Well, the best example of that is if you've driven on 83 lately.
Oh, well, yeah.
Driving habits have
changed.
dramatically changed when they know there's cameras there.
Yeah, and I'm for the cameras, but I just know that, the state law caps how many we can have. We did pass legislation to try and expand the number of them, but it's still not going to meet the demand for cameras. I get a lot of them. I mean, I don't speak for my colleagues, but we get a lot of them. And so I think, knowing that, where those intersections are, is something that the department, I'm sure, could just share with you and say,
yes, sir,
in the interim, it's going to take us 6 months to do a camera, but if you guys could use that to deploy somebody here in the interim, I think it would make the residents feel a lot better because they feel like, look, the city's responding to our concerns, and in instances where you have children, it's about just general safety of our young people.
It's a great, oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say it's a great idea. I want it stated for the record that I didn't realize there was an open seat over there, so I'm not estranged from my colleagues. But when it comes to license plate readers and deployment of license plate readers, actually the thing we look for more than anything is throughput, right? Crime is not, I want to capture the most amount of vehicles to get the best chance. So that's a case where working with the DOT is actually really helpful in actually just capturing pure traffic throughput, as opposed to other things that we don't track that. So they would have that. So that's a great point.
I will say, the PC alluded to it, that, since COVID, nationally, we saw an increase of not only fatal accidents, but increasing in speed on all major highways to the point where we actually created a fatal crash reduction team, where we deployed them in areas that historically had shown analytically where they need to be based on accidents. I will say that any district commander is probably getting a whole host, either through their commanders' meetings or via email, of areas where they need to deploy their officers. It is something that we monitor in reference to car stops of not only just the officers doing something, but where we see that the NCOs as well as other members of the team can also make these car stops, and it doesn't have to result in a citation, but at least sometimes, at least that warning, at least that giving that education and stopping an individual, because I think the outward effect is that car stop is a ripple effect of anybody that goes to that intersection who knows what's going on. Is, oh, the police are here and actively being engaged. So I think it pays dividends, and it's something we definitely will look into.
Yeah, I agree. I think you've sort of made the connection for me around getting the guns and sort of like how it can lead to other sort of more serious issues. But, the vehicle safety and perception, it just all sort of fits together. When I talk to residents in my district, like, they just feel like people just aren't obeying any of the laws. And obviously there's the more serious stuff, and then there's the traffic stuff, which is those safety issues. People getting hit, it's a big deal for families. And so I just think if we can use the data to sort of drive where we put resources, that'll be helpful. And I'll start including my district commander whenever I get a request for a camera or speed camera or a speed bump, to say, look, I'm going to start including you guys in that conversation with DOT so that you're hearing what I'm hearing, because obviously, it can lead to solving more serious crimes, but also just that quality of life, I think, is a good thing for our residents. The other really quick question I had, and I don't need a huge response on this because I know we're going to have a whole hearing. What was the role of the department in developing the citation docket? I know that there's obviously a ton of things in the city code that are criminal offenses or carry some sort of criminal offenses. This list is not obviously inclusive of all of them. Can you speak to the department's role in developing the list? And obviously, we don't have to have I don't want to get into a debate about which things should be on here or not, because I'll have opinions on that when we have the hearing.
No,
If you could answer briefly, that would.
Yeah, we work basically hand in hand with the state's attorney. So, and some of the issues that are real problems were the first ones that we started to enforce, ones that we see that we constantly get complaints about that we weren't able to enforce before. We can now use citations to help basically rid the areas of those problems. So we start small. We may add some things. We're going to work with the state's attorney. It's something new for all of us. It's the first time that we also are able to give people a time frame on when to expect or to go to court for it if they have a court date. We used to just write the citation years ago, and then it would just have to wait for the court date. So he's done a lot, the state's attorney has done a lot of thought into this on how the process is going to work, and I'm excited to see what we can do once we can do those low level and get not only to enforce the crimes, but also to get some of the individuals who need some assistance, who never reached out for it, forced to do some of the rehab and also community service. That's going to be a big part. I don't know how long it's been since we've had people in the city doing community service. So those are some things that we're looking forward to.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other questions? All right, I think I am, wait, one more. One of the things I noted in going through the deck that you guys provided, and we talked about this in various capacities, but that was the decline in carjackings. And we've talked about that a number of times in this committee. We've seen a lot of young people involved in those carjackings. And then the increase in auto theft. And there was a point in which auto theft was way down because of key technology, and then has now gone way up because of new vulnerabilities with Kias. I'm curious, for the folks that we're finding are involved with the auto thefts using are we finding those to be young people? Oh, your microphone.
We're not making a ton of arrests for the stolen autos, because what usually happens, they abandon the car before before we can get to it. Also, if we're behind a car and it takes off, we don't pursue it because it's too high of a risk. But when we do make the arrest, we do have probably a mix, and I'd have to get you the exact numbers, but we look at it all the time. It's usually a mix. Sometimes it's just kids joyriding, they steal a car. But the carjacking, I think, is just a lot of quality work from our citywide robbery team and from all of our detectives, the state's attorney's office, the attorney general's office, with some of these young people where they actually continue to arrest them. I know the mayor, when we have someone, the first thing he asks me is when we have someone arrested for carjacking, tell me if they've been arrested for something else. So I know he's working with the governor to help that with Department of Juvenile Services. So I think all those things collaboratively have left us with where we are now, which is a good decrease in carjackings. But I'm cautiously optimistic. It's summertime, and we've got to make sure that we continue that downward trend of carjackings.
Yeah, I think there are a number of ways that I think we should consider tackling this issue, things that could be potentially new or otherwise. In my district had a particular cove of sorts where they've had like 4 stolen vehicles dumped. And it of course came to me. I was like, well, why don't we figure out a way to, we know they keep dropping them here. They've had like, 4 maybe in the last 8 months or something like that. That's not a lot, but enough such that if we had a camera, my guess is it's probably the same 1 or 2 people who are dropping the cars there. They know the area well. They know that there are not many cameras. They know they can get away with it, and so they continue to do it at the same locations. So, and just thinking about those pieces, we may not be able to catch them on the front end, but thinking about what we can do to leverage technology, relationships, or otherwise, intelligence about where we're finding these these stolen vehicles, to figure out who's involved, and that might help us. So that's my last thought there. Whatever we can do to be a little bit wiser about catching folks who are involved in those crimes, I think.
I think, through our districts as well as our regional auto theft task force, currently, up to the 17th, we have 77 arrests year to date for stolen autos, 37 of which have been juveniles. I will say that when it comes to not only the location where the vehicles are taken, but then we do have those hubs where we're recovering them at, then we look geographically in reference to recidivism and other things. This plays into those increased city watch cameras and other, home cameras. So we're looking at all of that when it comes to those locations where, those dump areas. I think the issue that you saw, the decrease in the carjackings, was because of the carjacking protocol we introduced in reference to, once you hear about it, the citywide broadcast units are now going concentrically around to try to find out where these vehicles are. So we're being more robust on the carjacking part, but because I think of the Kia and that Hyundai issue that we're nationally we're all being hit with, we're seeing a lot of those issues where I don't have to carjack a car, I learned this trick, and now I can just steal a car. So we're kind of combating it on both ends.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate all the work you guys are doing, and as we continue to work with you to think creatively, innovatively on how we can use our resources and our intelligence and everything else to the best of our ability, always a pleasure. So with that, once again, no questions. This hearing is in recess, and I'll see you guys next time.